This week on the 77% Street Debate.
Our family is suffering now.
Tanzania and the rest of Africa is not really independent because even though colonialism ended, but now we have neocolonialism.
This is not a struggle that is disconnected from its historical beginnings.
When you lose your culture, when you lose values, and when you lose your history, it all means that you lose your nature.
This is not the story necessarily of only being a victim. It is the story of resilience, because regardless of everything that has been done, we are still here.
Hello and welcome back to the 77% Street Debate. This week we are in Tanzania. And this country, if you know a little bit about your history, was colonized first by the Germans before the British took over after World War I. But so many years later, the scourge of colonization is still felt in contemporary Tanzania. And today we want to find out how that head rears its head, and who better to answer this question for me than Tanzanians. And so I want to start with Sisi, just for the benefit of our audience who have no contact with Tanzania, have no clue what the country is. Give us a brief history of colonization in this nation. Very brief.
Tanzania was first colonized by the Germans, and this happened in the 1800s, and then followed by the British, which is a very short period. And then the country gained independence in 61, and we just celebrated our 62nd year of independence. The country was unified post-independence. And so we've had a history of having mainland Tanzania, which is Tanganyika, which had a different period of colonization than the islands, which is Zanzibar.
Okay. We have Jovita here, who's an assistant professor of history, and I actually just want to find out from you. Sisi said celebrating independence. Do you think that Tanzania, and indeed the rest of Africa, is truly independent?
I think Tanzania and the rest of Africa is not really independent because even though colonialism ended, but now we have neocolonialism, where everything we do is somehow is determined by the West. Even the aids we are receiving have some conditions which favor the West. Our crops, world market, the price are determined by the West. So there are a lot of things that are happening which makes us not as free as we would like to be.
Okay, so before we move into neocolonialism, which for sure we'll be touching on, I want to come to John Mbano, who is an ancestor of one of the freedom fighters, I would say, of this country. Your great-grandfather was unfortunately murdered in a horrendous way. He was hung, and parts of his remains were taken with the former colonial masters. I mean, this is a very difficult story to even say out loud. So tell me a little bit about why searching for his remains is so important. It might sound pretty obvious for people who underwent that, but for viewers who might not understand, why is it so important that you get back the remains?
It is our culture that we Africans, we end mourning or crying when we bury each and every part of the body of the person. So we are in search of it so that we end up the mourning.
Yeah. And this search has taken you as far as Berlin, where you've been able to speak to the state minister, and most recently, when President Frank-Walter Steinmeier came, you spoke with him. Do you think you'll be successful?
Certainly, yes.
Why are you optimistic now?
Of course, his visit to us was just a starting of our healing, and we talked with him friendly in a very private way. And he promised us that he's going to join us hands in bringing back the remains.
Okay. Speaking of stolen things and artifacts, Nicholas here is working on a project to do just that, return some of the stolen works that were from Tanzania. But before we go into the repatriation of those items, again, the trauma and being separated from things of value, do you feel that in contemporary Tanzanian society?
I think one of the most important things that the German colonialism did to the country is taking out a lot of material from the country to Germany, to museums in Germany. And the taking out of these material, which is more of a symbol of what the colonial system did at large, which is do economic, social, and political plunder of local systems. And right now, these systems are impossible to see them obviously. They are still in working, they are still very much present today.
Yeah, okay. So Nicholas has just told us a little bit about why returning these items is important. And Amani, you're working on something similar, right? You've written a book called Nkoba about exactly this. Tell us a little bit about the book and why, it's important. Someone might think, well, it's just art, it's just a few masks. What's the big deal?
The key takings of the book is mainly to enlighten, the society about the traditional, this medicinal bag and the way how they perceive it. And but also I went even far by looking for the significance of it, like if this object is to be returned, what will the community feel about it? But also, since it has been that long, and we have had this culture of like inheriting one another, so the bag itself also was supposed to be inherited to someone else, and the book is just like to also raise these questions of to whom this bag was belonged to, and how effective it is.
So we're speaking here from a conceptual point of view about artifacts, but again, coming back to you, your family, this is real, right? So has it affected you from an emotional point of view? As in, when you think about your children and your father, how does it make you feel, and your great-grandfather?
Our family is suffering now because we have lost a lot of, we lost a lot. When the head was chopped and the artifacts were taken, so we had nothing. We were left empty-handed. No one was there to narrate any story of what was special for those artifacts which were taken. So we have lost our culture. Yeah.
Okay. So coming back to you, Jovita, losing culture, losing human beings, breaking up families, what has that done for the larger Tanzanian society today?
Most of people no longer associate, they don't take traditions that friendly as they supposed to be. It's like colonialism depersonalize culture. So right now, anybody who is following traditions to the core, they are referred to as witches or things like that. So there is a breakdown in cultural continuation in terms of culture. Even believing in traditions is no longer there because you are a witch. Otherwise, why don't you go to the church and things like that?
Yeah. Okay. Sisi, you're doing a film actually that's following Mbano's story and another one as well. And as you were doing it, anything that jumped out at you which you weren't aware of about colonial history?
I think speaking to the question of loss, it's also the loss of the importance of the spaces that we still occupy as a nation. So in most of these cases, you have to understand that communities had to watch when their freedom fighters, their fathers, their uncles were being hanged in public spaces. Some of the spaces that they chose, for example, were like market spaces, where obviously this is where the community came to gather, right? Things happened there. There were life events that attached them to those spaces. And so then by making these points where the people had to be there to actually watch something traumatic happen, it's like you've detonated something within that space, and the community will never be able to exist around it in the same way ever again. There's a loss of meaning to that space as well. So there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of the reclamation of the history that we need to do as a nation, which doesn't just look at what has been lost and taken outside, but what has been lost inside as well.
Okay, let me come to Edgar briefly, because the two of you are students of history. And Sisi has said things have been lost within you as human beings. Do you identify with this statement?
Of course, a lot of things have been lost in Tanzania, taking away our remains. That is a tragedy. It is a tragic chapter in our history, because once we have lost our culture, it will be easy to be filled with the culture which is out of our custom. You know why the Chinese are great? Because they have preserved their culture. The same is true to Indians and the others.
Okay, but you know what you're saying is absolutely spot on. But before we move, I'll come back to that. But I just want to find out: do you think that Tanzanians in general and Africans, are we traumatized from colonization? Would you say that we are? Yeah. You want to say something? Yeah.
Yeah. So of course we are. I can say that on the point of view, it's in this sense that at some point of what has happened on colonialism has affected people so much to the sense that they are afraid of doing some kind of things just because it happened. So we can't say that everything is fine with us. It's not fine, but what I see is like we are just not the offsprings of our great-grandfathers and our grandfathers, but we're just continuing what was planned by the Germans. We're just keeping their tradition which they wanted to impose in us. We are not keeping what our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers were taught by their great-grandfathers. Yeah. Because what I think the wish of our great-grandfathers was that us to live the tradition which was meant for us to live what was made for us. But we are now not trying to live, but we are also trying to starve in what was brought to us.
Okay. I like this point because there's something that Frantz Fanon said in his book Black Skin, White Masks, that this erasure of culture really reduced our self-confidence, so that even when we want something done, we might look to a white person to do it. Is that still the case here? I see you nodding fervently.
I mean, let's speak about the spaces in which we're continuing to want to keep our cultural goods, right? They are museums. Museums were built on a system of colonialism and to keep things away from people.
We're in a museum right now.
And unfortunately, I don't think that we are fully reimagining what that space should mean for us in terms of access for our communities, the way these things should be stored, if they even should be stored. But if you continue to learn from a system that was built to keep those things exhibited and to keep those things away and to keep those things stored, then it's just a continuation of erasure. It's something that we're embracing. We're completely starving ourselves. I couldn't agree more. So I don't think it's just a question of people who are here, but it's also the systems which are still in place, which we have to live in.
Okay, let's talk about those systems. Earlier you spoke about neocolonialism, Jovita. How is it still manifesting? You know, because independence you gained, what did you say, 62 years ago? Yeah. Why are we still talking about colonization today then?
As I said, colonialism ended, but neocolonialism started. And the people who are, when you're looking at the gaining and losing, the same people who are colonizing are the same people who are gaining now through neocolonialism. So they've just changed the system. But you are free, but everything you are doing in your country is determined by the same people who colonized you before. Even the language. Yeah. We are talking about English, French. But when you want to use your own language, it looks like it's not proper. Okay. So we are saying we are still in it. Right. So we need to continue to talk about it.
So what do we do then about that, Nicholas? Because for how long will we be talking about neocolonialism and colonialism? Where is our agency? Where is our right to determine who we want to be as Africans?
This is not the story necessarily of only being a victim. It is the story of resilience, because regardless of everything that has been done, we are still here. We are still planning, we are still creating, we are still telling stories. And I think there is a power in owning that space in which you tell your own stories. It's for us as artists, as creators, as leaders to take that action to say, like, how are we going to tap into that? So there is a power of, as Sisi was saying, to reimagine, to say how can we be, to say what can we tap within ourselves, okay, and continue to create that process of change.
And speaking of change, certainly the German government seems to be willing, at least for now, to apologize for the atrocities that were committed in Africa. Recently, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the president of the country, as I mentioned earlier, did come to the country and issued a very strongly worded apology. Here's some of what he said.
What happened here is part of our shared history, the history of your forefathers and the history of our forefathers in Germany. We Germans also need to face up to this history so that we can build a brighter future together. As Germany's federal president, I want to ask for forgiveness for what Germans did to your forefathers.
So, John Mbano, that statement was actually directly for you, for your family, and it was very, very personal. How did that feel, and is that enough?
Actually, it is just a starting. As I said before, we started getting the healing, but we told him this cry will end up when each and everything is brought back to our country, especially in Songea. Mm-hmm. What we want is to bring back our culture, so that we continue with our normal life.
Yeah. But obviously the interests are varied, right? So for your family, you want obviously the remains of your family members back. For the government, it could be reparations. A word I hear all the time. You know, if we admit to these ill doings, then the Africans will want money. True or false?
Well, reparations, I think, is an important word because it's a word that is demanding something for the loss. And that's because these things accrued over time. Though the things that they took, the people that they took with intention to destroy, and intention to gain also because it did build the wealth that went away from these communities, from our countries. And so when we talk about reparations, what we're talking about is a restoration of that wealth. It does not necessarily mean that it is only something that can be acquired through paying people back in terms of cash. But you are talking about imagining how reparations can at least add to either cultural building, infrastructural building. There's so many ways. It's people who ancestors need to come home or go to these countries to look for their people. How is that being facilitated? All of these things just need to be made, and reparations is something that is done on our terms, nobody else's. And so it's important. It's an important word to use. It's an inclusive word to use. But I guess everybody likes to say that it's only about money, and then it makes it a very easy thing for people to ignore. But it's been something that's been part of the discourse since before pre-independence for a lot of countries, for a lot of people, for a lot of indigenous peoples who've been demanding things to be returned home.
Yeah. So on the other side of that answer, somebody might say, well, why should we, as a contemporary German society of today, be concerned about things we weren't even a part of? And then the question might come, well, how much money? When does it stop? Jovita, any thoughts?
There are a lot of things that were done during colonialism which somehow benefited their countries, isn't it? So they can't come out of it. They are part of it. So what to do now is something that we can work together. Because it's not like you have to pay a lot of money because of this. No, we just have to discuss together and see what we can do from here onward.
Okay. So Amani, let me come to you. Government support. Is the government actively looking to heal the nation, to help you get back your goods that were stolen, or is it really a reserve of historians and young people like you?
Well, I think also the government is like engaging also in different ways. They have like different institutions, including the National Museum of Tanzania, but also we have been into like several initiatives as well as these conferences which actually raise these discussions. I think what happened has no value or price. You know, it's the life of the people, and the people that, even these objects that we are, discussing them today, we are not just discussing them as just objects. We are discussing about the lives of the people, the cries, the tears, the blood, and everything. I think the word money should not come into it, but it should be a way of like compensating.
Okay, so I want to ask our general audience at the back who I haven't heard from. You know, you came here, you know that we were talking about colonization. I want to hear your views of how it's affected you or not over the years. Any takers? Yeah.
The effect of colonization in most of African countries, it's come to affect the individual people. So when you lose your culture, when you lose values, and when you lose your history, it all means that you lose your nature. Yeah. And once you lose your nature, then you have lose your character. And once you lose your character, then you have lose everything. So apart from ruining the happiness of that man's family, they've ruined the mindset of most of African people. So that also affecting education system. You can see most of people are studying from primary to advanced to university level, but there is no anything that can gain from that education. Instead of a large number of learners is happening to the society, but most of people, they can't even feed themselves.
Okay. All right. Let me hear from you.
The fact that we are trying to bring back what we lost from the essence of colonialism we need to change our systems, because that's what we are living for. We are not living for our lost goals. We are not living for the artifacts that were taken. So the fact that the government and other people are making a lot of efforts to preserve these things to be as the essence of our history, but we need to change our systems from our leadership styles and other things, because that's what we are living for. If we keep on with these artifacts, we have museums, we have other things, a lot, we are celebrating our independence. That's not the fact. We need to change our system, language we are using, the culture, and a lot of taboos and anything coming across the system. We need to go back to our ground.
Yeah, while I understand that, I have to push back a little bit. Don't you think these two worlds can exist in tandem? Where, you know, yes, we have Western attire and speaking English, but also preserving Swahili and our traditional dress.
Why should we have English at the same time we have Swahili? If we push our Swahili language to be a complete tool that can be used worldwide is enough, then anyone need to interact with us need to learn Swahili language. As the fact, if we need to interact with them, we need to learn English language.
Okay. Any other points from the back here?
Yes. For me, I can take the impact of colonialization in positive way. I'm a technological believer. I'm always believing in technology. Through colonization, it have been a source of our technological improvement. In previous, we have our technology, local technology, but through colonization, we have obtained new technology, which we are using up to today. I'm thinking that without colonization, maybe we are still using the same technology we are using in great fathers.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say two things to you about that, or to just ask two follow-up questions. How can you possibly know that we wouldn't have been advanced? You know, we are told that colonization robbed us of our history. So how can you be sure? And secondly, there was things like advanced calculus, and Africans were doing great things before colonization. What makes you think we would not have continued to do that?
I can say that I'm 100% sure for that, because when we are talking about technology, I'm talking about problem solving. In previous, the way we are solving our problems, we are very local. For now, we have mobile phones. In Africa, we are sure that these mobile phones, these mobile cars, were originated from Europe and other continents other than Africa.
So how can you possibly say that A and B would have happened if A was interrupted from B?
Maybe it is true, but maybe it will take a long time, because they were already advanced. So we have been jumped a step there. They took their technology and put it to us, rather than for us to develop from scratch up to there.
Yeah, okay.
But also in political system, our current constitution favor much power to president, which is become like a problem, because even the electoral commission, head of electoral commission is being appointed by the president. So it make the one system to be continue to overpower the other political parties.
So political systems compromised, including and the education system as well. So let me hear some solutions before it gets really noisy, right? So we've been talking about the impact of colonization today. What do we do to ensure that we're healing as a continent, as a country, and so that this can be something that stays in our history?
I want to give you a secret of Singapore's success, which made them to move from being a third world country into the first world country. And I captured this formula from the acronym MPH. M stands for meritocracy. It means that you choose the best people to rule. The problem of Africa is that when it comes to the choosing of maybe finance minister or prime minister, we choose our cousin, we choose our son and the other member from the ruling party. We need to choose the best people. That's what Singapore did. And P stands for pragmatic, which means it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, but if it catches mice, that's a good cat. So we need to choose any ideology which is good for us. And last is H, which stands for honest. So of course it is very hard to achieve, but when it's come to honesty, we need to ensure we end corruption. One of the things which brought many third world countries down, including Africa, it is corruption. So we need to punish not only junior people, but also the very senior people. And last, what we need to do I think we need to transform the system. And that system is African unity. The problem of Africa, it is disunited. So if we have African unity, I think we'll be better.
Okay. Sissy, I'm going to have to come and close with you because I opened with you. What are your thoughts as to how Africa can become Singapore, Korea, Ireland, all former colonies that are doing very well now?
Well, we should also remember that this is not a struggle that is disconnected from its historical beginnings. From its very inception, from the point before we got independence, there were people fighting for that. And so we're only a continuation of that. Part of restoration really is about reclaiming things that are part of memory. And as artists, we have a really great opportunity to meet with communities, hear their stories, bring those stories forward. Those are things that will add to the national history, to the national memory. And in that, whatever practice we have, we will also be continuing a new language that is ours, that is restorative, that looks like us, that sounds like us.
Well, I thank you for your comments, and I thank you all for your contributions, and I thank you for viewing.